The trucks appeared without warning. Their engines roared, breaking the silence of the Guanacaste Reserve in Costa Rica. One by one, they drove deeper into the protected area, and when their beds opened, tons of bright orange mass spilled onto the ground. The air filled with a strong citrus smell. It was a very unusual load and an even more unusual mission. Local birds flew overhead with curiosity, and wild animals watched cautiously from behind the trees. But in the middle of this chaos, two ecologists were watching the process with excitement. For them, this wasn't the destruction of nature. This was the beginning of a bold experiment that could either bring a dying ecosystem back to life or turn into a disaster for the protected land. Daniel Jansen and Winnie Hallwachs were not ordinary scientists. This married couple of ecologists from the University of Pennsylvania had spent years studying the unique nature of Costa Rica. They loved this country. Even though it is small, Costa Rica is home to about 6% of all biological diversity on Earth. Jansen and Hallwachs were determined to protect this natural wealth. They met as students while studying at Princeton and graduated in 1976. Since then, they not only shared their lives, but also joined forces in science, dedicating themselves to studying and protecting tropical forests. For many years, they worked as researchers and advisors in the Guanacaste Conservation Area. During their work, the couple faced a serious problem. Many areas that were once covered in lush tropical forest had been turned into cattle pastures. After decades of heavy grazing, these lands became dry and almost lifeless. The grass was tough and sparse, and the soil was worn out and compacted. The natural variety of plants and animals was gone, and these once rich lands had become an ecological desert. Restoring these areas became a mission of life for Jansen and Hallwachs. They knew that without human help, the damaged pastures might stay like that for decades, maybe even centuries. Nature needed urgent help to overcome the damage caused by careless human activity. In 1997, the scientists got an unexpected chance. A company called Del Oro had built an orange juice factory near the border of the reserve. Most activists and environmentalists were worried about this. Industrial companies often bring pollution and put extra pressure on the environment. But Jansen and Hallwachs looked at the situation differently. They learned that Del Oro had a big waste problem. Only the juicy part of oranges is used to make juice, while the peel, seeds, and fibrous pulp become waste. For a large company like Del Oro, this meant tons of organic waste every day. Getting rid of this waste cost the company a lot of money. They were thinking about different options, taking it to landfills, burning it, or composting. But all these methods were either expensive, bad for the environment, or both. That's when the ecologists came up with a daring idea. What if this organic waste could be used to restore the damaged parts of the reserve? Orange peels are rich in organic matter, and as they break down, they can feed poor soil. It could be a perfect win-win. The company gets rid of its waste, and the reserve gets a natural fertilizer to help its ecosystems recover. The idea sounded crazy. Many ecologists and activists were shocked by the thought of dumping industrial waste in a national reserve. But Jansen and Hallwachs believed in their theory and were ready to take the risk. They made an unusual offer to Del Oro. The company would give part of its land next to the reserve to be protected by the state, and in return, it would be allowed to dump orange waste on certain parts of the reserve, the very same damaged pastures that needed to be brought back to life. For the company, it was a profitable deal. They not only got a free way to get rid of their waste, but also gained the image of an environmentally responsible business. For the reserve, the benefits were also clear. The protected area would grow, and there was a chance to bring damaged land back to life. But to carry out this bold plan, they needed government permission. After long discussions and a careful look at possible risks, the project was approved, though with some strict conditions. Del Oro was allowed to dump only natural agricultural waste, orange peels and pulp without any chemical additives. Before being transported to the reserve, the peels had to be treated to remove limonene, a natural substance that can slow plant growth. And most importantly, the waste could only be dumped on specific areas that had once been pastures and had already lost all biological diversity. In 1998, the plan went into action. Del Oro began delivering orange waste to the reserve. The scale of the operation was impressive. The company planned to deliver about 12,000 tons of orange peels every year, which would require around 1,000 truckloads. Over time, this could reach up to 250,000 tons of organic waste, enough to cover an entire football stadium in a thick layer. The first months of the experiment were not very pleasant from an aesthetic point of view. Bright orange hills of peels covered 3 hectares of land and looked like something from another planet. The strong citrus smell could be noticed from far away. Local residents and tourists were unhappy with the sight and smell of this strange dump in the reserve. However, within just 6 months, the orange mass started to clearly break down, turning into rich, dark compost. The smell slowly faded, and the first brave plants began to grow through the layer of rotting material. Janssen and Hallwachs carefully documented the whole process. They set up yellow markers to show the boundaries of the test site, took regular soil samples, and tracked all the changes in soil and plant life. It seemed like the experiment was starting to work as planned, but then an unexpected force got in the way: human competition and jealousy. Another juice company, Tico Fruit, working in the same region, was very unhappy with the deal between Del Oro and the reserve. Tico Fruit had already spent a lot of money building its own waste processing systems, and the chance given to their rival to dispose of waste for free felt like an unfair advantage. Tico Fruit launched a large campaign against the experiment. The company ran scary ads in newspapers and on TV, showing the orange waste as mountains of rotting garbage that spread disease and attracted pests. They claimed the project would bring fruit flies, which could harm local crops, and that the bad smell from the decaying mass caused headaches and nausea among nearby residents. Even though there was no scientific proof for these claims, the negative publicity worked. Public opinion quickly turned against the project. Local farmers began to worry about their crops, and tourism companies feared the reserve would lose its appeal for visitors. In the end, Tico Fruit filed a lawsuit in a Costa Rican court, claiming the project broke environmental laws and created a dangerous example that could lead to uncontrolled waste dumping in protected areas. Janssen and Hallwachs, along with representatives of the Guanacaste Reserve and Del Oro, strongly defended the project. They brought in scientists who explained the possible environmental benefits of the experiment. The respected group Rainforest Alliance publicly confirmed that the project was safe for the environment. Del Oro provided evidence that it was following all the rules and restrictions. But the case took a political turn, and in 1999, just a year after the experiment began, the Supreme Court of Costa Rica ordered an immediate stop to the project. The judges admitted that while the experiment itself might be environmentally helpful, it set a dangerous precedent that other companies could use to justify dumping different kinds of waste in protected areas. By the time the project was shut down, about 12,000 tons of orange peels had been dumped on the test site, roughly the same weight as 2,000 adult African elephants. The peels covered an area the size of 3 football fields in a layer about 1 foot thick. The ecologists had to stop the experiment and leave the site as it was. No more orange peels, no more human interference. Nature would have to deal with what had already been done. After the court's decision, interest in the experiment faded quickly. Soon, only a few scientists and reserve staff remembered it. The area where the experiment took place was barely visited or studied. Years passed and the world changed. The problems of climate change and loss of biodiversity became more serious. Scientists around the world began searching for effective ways to restore damaged ecosystems and fight the greenhouse effect. In 2013, nearly 15 years after the project ended, a young researcher from Princeton University named Timothy Truer heard about the forgotten experiment during a conversation with Professor Janssen. The story fascinated Truer. What had happened to the site where tons of orange peels had been dumped? Had the experiment become an environmental failure, as critics had predicted, or had nature found a way to use the waste? Truer decided to check the results for himself. In 2014, he organized an expedition to Costa Rica to find the site and see what it looked like 16 years after the experiment began. The search wasn't easy. The landscape of the reserve had changed a lot over a decade and a half. Using old maps and GPS coordinates, the research team spent several days trying to locate the experimental plot. When they finally reached the area they believed was the right place, they were met with a surprising discovery. Instead of a barren patch of land covered in rotting orange peels, they found a dense, lush forest. The researchers at first thought they had made a mistake. The transformation was so dramatic. They kept searching, pushing through the thick vegetation, and only when one of the team members spotted a flash of yellow in the distance, the remains of one of the markers Jansen and Hallwachs had placed at the start of the experiment, did they realize they were indeed in the right spot. The marker was almost completely hidden by plants, and there was no trace left of the orange peels. Instead, they saw an impressive variety of trees, shrubs, and vines. The rich vegetation created a cool shade where a thriving understory of ferns and flowering plants grew. But to fully understand the transformation, the researchers needed more than just personal impressions. They needed solid scientific data. They began a detailed analysis and measurements. Trier and his team compared soil samples taken at the beginning of the experiment with current conditions. They set up measuring stations across the site, counted and measured every tree, and identified the plant species. For an objective comparison, they also studied a control site on the other side of the road. Land with a similar history of use, former pasture, but without any orange peel added. The measurement results amazed the researchers. The site where the orange waste had been dumped was completely different from the control site. The soil was much richer in nutrients. The tree biomass had increased by 176% compared to the untreated land. On the experimental plot, the researchers found 24 different tree species, while the control site had only 8. Among the trees stood a giant fig tree so thick that it took 3 adults to wrap their arms around its trunk. The tree canopies had grown together, forming a dense green cover that blocked out the sun and created conditions typical of a mature tropical forest. In this restored forest, the researchers saw animals not usually found in open pastures, including a tara, a large forest-dwelling weasel that needs a healthy forest to survive. The difference between the experimental and control areas was so clear it could even be seen from the air, a bright green patch surrounded by sun-scorched pastures. The researchers made detailed notes of their observations, analyzed the soil composition, and documented all the plant and animal species they found. The results were published in a scientific journal, creating a stir in the environmental community. The conclusions were clear. The orange peel experiment was a phenomenal success. In just 16 years, a degraded pasture had turned into a thriving tropical forest full of biodiversity. The orange waste didn't just enrich the soil with essential nutrients like nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. It also helped suppress the growth of aggressive grasses that normally block forest recovery. For Jansen and Hallwachs, this was proof of their theory. Even though the project was stopped early, it still achieved remarkable results. Their creative thinking turned the problem of industrial waste into a solution for restoring damaged ecosystems. Most importantly, this restoration method was almost free. Normally, forest restoration requires large investments in buying seedlings, planting by hand, and applying fertilizers. With the orange peels, the only cost was transporting the waste, something the company needed to do anyway. The Costa Rica experiment inspired scientists around the world to look for new ways to use organic waste to restore natural ecosystems. Studies began on turning orange peels into biofuel and biodegradable plastics. Food companies started exploring how to turn their waste into a resource for environmental restoration. Of course, the method isn't universal. The warm, humid climate of Costa Rica helped the organic matter break down quickly and encourage plant growth. In other climates, the process might be slower or less effective. Also, any addition of organic waste to natural ecosystems must be done with great care, under scientific supervision, and with attention to local environmental conditions. But the story of the orange peel forest in Costa Rica remains an inspiring example of how creative solutions to environmental problems can lead to unexpected and amazing results. It shows that sometimes the waste of one system can become a valuable resource for another, and that nature has an incredible ability to heal if we give it the chance and the right support. From hills of orange peels to a lush tropical forest, the transformation took only 16 years. For ecological processes, that's a blink of an eye. For us, it's a lesson. Sometimes the boldest and most unconventional ideas can lead to the most impressive outcomes. Maybe next time you peel an orange, you'll look at the skin differently. Maybe it's not garbage. Maybe it's the beginning of a new forest.